Hey, what's a D&D rule so silly and pointless that DMs just ignore it? Come on, let us know in the comments below. This one's for the sake of my DM. He hates phantasmal force. Now, why does the spell give targets a chance to realize the illusion is an illusion when the very spell itself says they will rationalize anything related to the illusion? If it were a saving throw, that would be one thing. But why would they ever use their action to deeply scrutinize an illusion so perfect that it warps their brain into thinking any contradictions or flaws in it are perfectly explainable and rational? Flying and grappling. You grapple them. Their speed is 0, so now they fall. Boom! Falling puts them out of reach, so now their speed is no longer 0. And they're able to fly again, except the fall resolves first. Why can't I just air wrestle? What about trying to keep a creature from continuing to fly away while keeping hold of it? And how the hell am I supposed to hitch a ride on a big birdie? Land's stride should work with your spells. Plant growth is grown from existing plants. Spike growth is created from non-magical twigs as the spell component. Please don't nerf a feature from a meh class and one of the weaker druid subclasses for no real reason. Thank you. Material components. Now this is a rule I've seen many DMs ignore. Imagine you could do this really cool thing, but unfortunately, you don't have 200 gold pieces worth of spell components to do it. I've seen creative DMs find a way to use it without causing issues for the player character, but it is definitely a rule I would ignore if I were a DM. Pretty sure I read this somewhere. Someone correct me if I'm imagining this because I can't find it. But you can't do two things if both require a bonus action, which kinda seems silly. For spells, it makes sense, though there aren't a lot of spells that do that. But I always rule that an action can be used for something that requires a bonus action. You're telling me that my Circle of the Moon druid can't mentally command an animated dead and then turn into a bear within a 6-second span? Or that my Barbarian can't inspire someone and then go into a rage? Now that's just ridiculous. Attacking someone, regardless of context, game flow, or triviality, must always roll initiative first. Many DMs will just let you hit things outside of initiative for expediency or other reasons, but this is rules as written illegal. Assassin Rogue is the only thing in the entire game that genuinely, mechanically cares about this. It bothers absolutely nothing else. Nets. I fucking hate the rules as written for nets. It's a ranged weapon with a range of 5 to 10 feet. Ranged attacks made within melee range, 5 feet, have disadvantage for some reason. Point-blank range doesn't exist in 5th edition. This means that nets, despite being within range, get disadvantage on attack rolls. It's so dumb. I always rule and request the DM rule in favor of the specific rule outweighing the general rule. It usually gets ruled in this fashion, but some DMs I've played with absolutely don't mess with this raw. Oh, I just ran into this gem the other night. One of my regular players suggested that Mage Hand could be used to pull the heart from an injured foe's body, despite the prohibition on attacking, simply because rules as written, the spell's description says that they can move a small object without causing damage, their unique interpretation of attacking to follow. Their idea was that removing the heart didn't damage either the body or the heart. Only the catastrophic loss of blood pressure to follow would cause actual death, so technically, it wasn't breaking rules as written. Just following their twisted logic gives me a migraine headache. The loading property of crossbows. Now technically, even if you have extra attack, you can't make 2 attacks unless you take crossbow expert or get a magic weapon. The heavy property of weapons, technically halfling, gnome, etc. Archers can't even use a longbow without disadvantage. Proportionately sized weapons aren't a thing, apparently. If we want to use it at all, we base it off strength and dexterity greater than 15. Bonus action cantrips don't trigger the exception to the 2 spells per turn rule either. Rules as written, you could quicken a fireball and cast firebolt in a turn, but not shillelagh and fairy fire. The rule is cantrip with a casting time of 1 action. We just make it a leveled spell in cantrip, unless you have action surge, of course. I have never played in a single game where anyone paid attention to rules about weapon swapping being an action. Shields weapons preventing spell casting with somatic components unless you have the right abilities. And the only reason I started paying attention to spell components in my main campaign is because the players are really high level and need that extra challenge. Not a minor rules as written, but for me, the biggest pain in my ass is concentration in 5th edition. Now, I understand the desire to limit the number of buffs that can be applied, but this mechanic basically neuters most buff spells, as it uses a spell slot for something that could end the next round with a single hit. I modified it so that the number of concentration spells that can be active is equal to 1 plus the con modifier, with every spell beyond the first incurring a concentration check equal to 10 plus the total level of active spells. This is really cool. It provides more challenge for my casters who may otherwise want to ignore con for other stats, makes battery casters possible but difficult, and makes buffing fun again without completely breaking the system. Now, realistically, a caster would only have 2 to 3 concentration slots on average anyway, which is enough to give most parties 1 buff each. Not ignored, but very silly. Negative max HP with regard to instant death isn't counted. For example, if your health is 100 and you take 199 damage from a spell, and then twice take 99 damage from a spell, you're only on 2 failed death saves, despite the fact that any of the first attacks being 200, or the second 2 being 100 HP, would have instantly killed your character. Somehow, they can take almost 3 times that damage and not be dead. This completely makes instant death a rule only for Tier 1 play. And it's stupid! A Zealot Barbarian, for example, should die instantly if they reach negative max HP while raging. A downed wizard should die if they get dropped from low HP by a big hit and then clipped by another big AoE or 2. The hide action can only be taken when a creature can't clearly see you. A lot of people I've played with in actual plays I've seen ignore this, or at least assume enemies can only see a cone in front of them. It does make sense in combat as the rogue ducks into a blind spot or uses some finesse distraction like pocket sand or the Arya dagger drop to gain advantage. It gives rogues a much needed source of advantage in games that don't use flanking, or if rogues just want to act more independently. 2 blinded creatures or creatures caught in a darkness spell fight normally against each other due to the disadvantage from being blinded being cancelled out by the advantage from going unseen by the other creature. Every DM I know house rules that they both have disadvantage in that scenario, but the rules as written says otherwise. Similarly, see invisibility. By rules as written, doesn't negate the combat disadvantage against a creature being invisible. The advantage-disadvantage is separate from the actual "the creature can't be seen" part. This is something Jeremy Crawford has doubled down on, proving that he's not immune to making bad calls rules-wise. Anything that may seriously startle someone, explosions, thunder, a crashing wave, falling debris, a bumpy ride, etc., immediately calls for a DC 10 concentration save. This is insanely annoying because it results in party members constantly causing saves for the casters. It's also so vague that players will always argue about not having to make a save. How far away from a fireball do I have to be to no longer be startled? Can my own actions cause such a save? Does my ally have to warn me first? It's just an inconvenient rule to use because it's hard to keep track of and causes strife at the table. Next up is the Artillerist Artificer's Eldritch Cannon. For some reason, it is an object, not a creature. This means it is straight up immune to many effects, and some combat rules don't even apply to it. It can't be banished, it can't be cursed, and it can't be targeted by many damaging spells. It clearly acts as a creature in combat, so why isn't it a creature? It can walk, and it can understand your telepathic commands. What is the fundamental difference between it and a tiny servant, for example? Also, it is immune to all conditions. This makes sense for most, but why can't it be grappled, restrained, or knocked prone? I just rule it as a construct without the immunities to these three conditions. It makes combat so much easier. And finally, now that I'm looking at it again, why does it have a 10 in every stat? I guess this is fine for Dex and Con, but I would assume that all other stats should be lower. When an Inquisitive Rogue uses Insightful Fighting on a creature and succeeds on the Insight check, they can use Sneak Attack on every single attack that hits that creature with almost no limits. With a Greatsword, multiple hits in a single turn, and even with spell attacks. As long as it's an attack roll, you can use Sneak Attack on the target of your Insightful Fighting. The only limit is you cannot get Sneak Attack if you have disadvantage on the attack. This argument for why this is true is that in the rules for Insightful Fighting it says, if you succeed, you can use your sneak attack against that target even if you don't have advantage on the attack roll, but not if you have disadvantage on it. And that is all the rules for the conditions that allow you to get sneak attack with this ability, after succeeding on the skill check, of course. Now, most people would rightly assume that the way this is worded implies that the intention is for all the other sneak attack rules to apply, and that this is just an extra condition to possibly get sneak attack without needing advantage by using your bonus action and succeeding on a skill check. And that is certainly the intended rule, and how every table should run it. But that is not what the wording says. It just says that as long as you don't have disadvantage, you can use sneak attack on your attacks against the target creature. Now, to explain why we can assume that the other rules for sneak attack don't apply in this case, even though it's not specified, of course, we look at the same book that the Inquisitive Rogue comes from, Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and look at the Swashbuckler Rogue. In the ability Rakish Audacity, the Swashbuckler also gets additional conditions under which they can use sneak attack. However, at the end of the ability describing the new extra condition to use sneak attack, it specifically states, all of the other rules for sneak attack still apply to you. This means that it was specifically specified in this ability that all other sneak attack rules still apply. But no such clarification is made in the Inquisitive Rogue's Insightful Fighting, which means that we can assume that if the normal rules of sneak attack did still apply, it would have been specified. Therefore, those normal rules don't apply. So what we've learned now is that there are no limitations on the type of attack roll, the type of weapon being used, or how many times it can be done in a single turn. The only limitation is the one given in the ability, which is that you cannot get sneak attack if you have disadvantage on the attack roll. I do not advocate for using this ruling in games, as it makes Inquisitive Rogues broken, especially if they can get multiple attacks. And I know that this interpretation of the rules has been overruled after the release of the book, at least I'm fairly certain. However, I do think it's a fun rules thing to look at and understand how someone who only had the book could come up with that rules as written interpretation for how the ability works. The more you know, Rainbow. Hey everybody, Brian Von VA checking in after the vid. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, ring the bell, and it would be a huge help to us if you signed up for our membership. You get early access to videos, some outtakes, and other goodies I'm sure down the line. We love you all. Please be safe, be happy, and enjoy gaming. See you later.